What are some ways to communicate better with someone that speaks a different language? So, I could share from my personal experience, especially living here in Japan the past 8 months, of how I've been able to communicate better with people that speak a different language than me. And my primary language being English, and obviously for the people in Japan to speak Japanese. I want to just share some tips of how I've been able to communicate better and get my message across, get my point across to the other person, and vice versa. So, obviously, one thing that helps with technology is just using like ChatGPT or Google Translate, a translating app where you could write down your language and have it translated automatically so they could read it. So I had to do that a lot. And anything that is very detailed in explanation, I have to use a translator. I mainly use Google Translate, although Google Translate is not always entirely accurate, but for the most part, it does get the message across pretty accurately. It'll miss some points, and a lot of times some things may get lost in translation, but for the most part, you could just rely on technology to help you do that. But for me, like, I'm trying to learn Japanese, so I'm trying to challenge myself and not try to use the phone as a translator and see how my improved Japanese could kind of close the gap in communicating better. And so, one thing that helps as well, speaking with someone of a different language, is speaking slowly. So, like a lot of people that I speak to, uh, they might know a bit of English. So, you utilize a little bit of English, you slow down your English, and maybe you break it up, you fragment it. So maybe you don't really talk in complete sentences a lot of times, but you just say a couple phrases for them to understand a lot easier. And maybe like you ask like what did you do this weekend? So, you'd say, "Oh, weekend, maybe Saturday, Sunday. What did you do?" You break it up into a lot simpler phrases and to words that they may understand. And so you would do that. You you break up the sentences and speak in very simple, like, baby language, right? Just in phrases and words where they could understand it. And I would also speak a lot slower. So if I were to just talk really fast in saying many sentences in such a short period of time, they're not going to grasp what I say. But if I slow it down, I break up the sentences into phrases and words, and if I speak slower, they'll be able to comprehend better, especially if they know a little bit of English or you utilize, like I utilize, the Japanese, or you using their language of comfort. You would also maybe use their language and speak slower and speak in simple words or simple phrases, and then they'll get a grasp of what you're trying to say, and they'll try to meet you in the middle. They'll usually, with people that I communicate in Japan, what they'll do too is they'll meet you in the middle, right? They won't speak fast. They'll slow down what they say. They'll break up what they say in a little bit of English with a little bit of Japanese with some short phrases and speak a lot slower for me to grasp it. And then through that exchange of simple words and slow speech, usually you could get your point across pretty effectively. And one thing I also utilize is using a lot of gestures. So if I say, "Oh, I'm very hungry," I kind of rub my belly, or, "Oh, I want to eat this," and or there's an animal that looks like this, and then you kind of do a little drawing for them to figure out what it is, or you do kind of like a gesture of what a cat would do or what certain type of animal would do, right? And so usually gestures along with the slower speech and the fragmented words and phrases, they could also understand what you're trying to say, and the gestures would also help portray like a visual or illustration, and they can be able to pick up on what it is you're trying to say. And so I would say that, and maybe a final thing too is, as I mentioned before, try to utilizing their language, right? Trying to learn their language and use it in simple forms, right? Simple words with a mixture of your primary language. And that's just meeting them in the middle, right? And they would appreciate that. They'd understand, oh, okay, you said this word with this English word. So you're trying to say, I think I know what you're trying to say. You're trying to say this and that, with the combination of the mixtures. So I use a little bit of English and a little bit of Japanese and what I'm trying to say, and I say it in very short forms with gestures. And I think one of the most important things is being very quick to listen rather than being quick to speak. So I would say being quick to listen but slow to speak. Really hear them out, let them finish their thoughts and whatever they're gonna say, right? And then after you hear everything that they have said, then you could respond and apply some of the techniques that I mentioned, some tips. But you can't be a great communicator if you don't know how to listen. If you're the one always talking all the time, then how are you going to understand what they're trying to say? Or are they even going to get a, a chance to say what they want to say? So you always got to be able to listen first. And when you do listen, maybe there's some words that you don't know, right? So maybe after listening, you could repeat some of the words that they said, repeat some phrases, whether it's in their language or your language. If they say something, maybe you say that same word, and they'll say, yeah, that's the word I'm trying to say. Or no, not that. What I'm trying to say is this word, right? And then you say, oh, I meant to say this. This is what I will do this weekend. They say, weekend? Yes, weekend. This is what I will do. So you repeat the words and phrases, and maybe you also repeat what they say so you could get a clarity of what some words and phrases that they said. And so repeating and also listening to what they're saying, I think those are very important tips to add into the communication. I feel like these are all tips and kind of techniques that I've applied to help me communicate better, and it has helped a lot when you meet them in the middle. And I think always the best communication, even though it's not perfect English or perfect Japanese, is just trying to meet in the middle and trying to hear each other out, and slow down the speech so they could understand what you're saying, utilizing the gestures, listening and repeating. And when both parties do that, you'd be surprised on how well the communication can be and how well you can get your point across. Although it might not always be perfect, and even within people that speak the same language, there's always a lot of miscommunication, right? So communication in itself is can be very difficult, at least to have clear communication and getting your point across to another person. But to do that with another in another language, with two parties that speak a different language, now that adds to the difficulty, right? But I think if you add these techniques and these tips to it, when I've added them, it has helped a lot with communicating people and just getting my point across or understanding what they're trying to say to me. And it's always more difficult when one party or another is not trying to meet you in the middle. They just speak really fast, and they just don't have, I guess, the communication skills, or they're not willing to meet you in the middle to try to help you, to try to understand you, and also to try to implement techniques so the other person can understand them, right? And so I feel like these techniques, at least for me personally, have been very helpful. And I hope that you could apply it too and see what works for you in order for you to be able to communicate better with someone that speaks a different language.